Religion in general and Christianity in particular were very, very important to medieval civilization. So this lecture is going to discuss, religion and how it interacted with medieval society in general. So first, I want to talk about the way in which the church was powerful, the way that priests and clergy, which means religious officials, where they derived their power from. First and foremost, priests, the administrators of Christianity, they controlled rituals such as baptism and marriage. Marriage, you know what that is. You couldn't get married without a priest. And baptism is the ceremony that brings someone, into Christianity. These things were controlled by priests. These things were very, very important to, regular people in medieval Europe. So there's a lot of power there, right? If you control those very important rituals, which in Christianity are called sacraments. The clergy, again, religious officials, could also excommunicate people, which would very deeply psychologically bother someone who's deeply religious. Excommunication simply means rejection from a religious group. They could kick someone out of Christianity. And again, if you're a medieval Christian person, you believe that means that you're, going to have a very unpleasant afterlife. Things are going to be very bad for you. So they have priests, clergy, bishops, popes, all of the people in charge of the church in medieval Europe had a great deal of power because they controlled these things. And in the late 11th, early 12th century, popes used this power to enhance their own status at the expense of some political leaders. Specifically, what happens, we're skipping a lot of detail, is that German emperors, again, the Holy Roman emperors, they would call themselves, at this point, they appointed their own bishops. And bishops are the people who are in charge of the church in a given territory. And the German emperors did this themselves. Popes wanted that power. Popes wanted to be able to choose which bishops are in which area. A lot of power derives from being able to fill in important posts. So the popes used what was called the Interdict, that is, a specific order which forbids the priests from performing those religious duties, again, marriages, baptisms, remember we discussed it a slide ago, forbid them from doing those things for a group of people. So the Pope says to the German emperor, hey, I'm choosing the bishops now. The German emperor says, I don't think so, I'm the king, I'm the emperor. And what the Pope could do is say, all right, I'm ordering all the priests in Germany, you can't marry any German people anymore. You can't perform any more baptisms, which again, they thought were very important. The people are then going to get mad about that, and they turned up the heat on the emperor, and eventually the popes won. The popes got that power from political leaders. And this ushers in this era of popes who are so powerful. They're almost like a sort of like emperor of like all of Europe. Pope Gregory the Seventh, who's the guy that is one of the main movers in getting that power from the German emperors. He laid out in a long written work why he thought popes really ought to be the ones in charge of everything, because popes get their power from heaven, whereas kings and princes get their power because their granddad became king through being evil. And you see his quote right there. I want you to remember that quote when I talk about it. So he's like, hey, listen, I get my power from, he's the guy on the left, from up on high. He gets his power because his granddad was, a more nasty, evil warlord than the other warlords. So really, I'm ought to be in charge. And Pope Innocent III over here, who was also big on crusades, was big on the Fourth Crusade, he would often force kings and princes to just obey what he told them to do, because again, he could deny their people religious comforts. He could deny their people, access to the church, which was super important to people back then. So he would regularly boss around kings and princes. He would get so petty that like the king of France wanted to like divorce his wife, and the Pope was like, "No, you can't. I won't let you. If you do, I'm gonna deny the people of France the access to the church." And so the king of France obeyed him. Everybody did. So this is really the high water mark for power at the upper echelons of the church. Now we'll bring our focus down the ladder a little bit to look at two different religious orders. When I say religious order, I'm talking about this religious group of like monks who would, devote their lives to Christianity in various forms. Saint Francis of Assisi is incredibly famous. He founded the Franciscan monks, which is again this specific, religious order. They're monks. They wear robes and they give up all their worldly possessions. They choose to live, in a very poor lifestyle and then live amongst the poor and help the poor. Francis of Assisi is a very interesting character himself. He was born rich, sort of like the Buddha was born rich too, Francis was born rich, but he abandons all his possessions, works with the poor, works for the poor, has to like beg for his food as other Franciscans do, and he attracts a lot of followers, and it becomes this, thing. You wear the robe, you help people, you're supposed to be really nice. This is sort of what's happening on the ground. The popes are doing their thing and getting power, but then there are also these religious movements like this. Another religious order were the Dominicans. They were monks. They also chose to live in poverty. You see them over there along with some Franciscan monks talking to the Pope. The Dominicans were founded to defend church teachings from heresy. Heresy is a word that needs definition. Heresy is the denial of basic church doctrines. At this point, Christianity is about 1,000 years old, and then they have specific sort of set things that they believe, and the Dominicans were founded in part to combat teachings that, sort of in 8 out of 10 ways would be Christian, but then would deviate on this point or that point, and the Dominicans were there to say, no, you need to believe all of what we believe. You can't differ here and there. And this desire to stamp out heresy is what also leads to the medieval Inquisitions. The Inquisition was a court run by the church used to put those accused of heresy on trial. And common heresies of the time would be like there was a big group of people that otherwise, sort of believed Christian beliefs, but they put their own spin on it, and they believed that the devil wasn't like this, that the devil was another god, that there were like two gods. There was the good one, and then the devil was like on par with him. He was like the evil god. That was like and otherwise it was Christianity, but then there was that, which is pretty different. That was a belief that gained some momentum at this time, and the Dominicans and then the Inquisition were created in part to like stamp that out, to be like, no, that's not okay. You can't believe that. In this religion, you can only believe in the one. And there were others. The Inquisition would, someone would be accused of believing, say, the thing I just described, or some other form of belief that would differ in some sort of way from regular Christianity. And at the time, someone accused of heresy could be tortured to confess, right? They would say, confess you believe this, and they would, physically harm someone to get them to confess, and you even could be executed. If you confessed, you typically wouldn't be executed at first, but if you confessed and then said, like, okay, I'm sorry, I realized the errors of my ways, I'll be good, and then later on they found out that you really still didn't agree with them, then you could be executed. This is also something I'd like you to think deeply about. I mean, it's sort of interesting, right, that they would put someone on trial just for disagreeing with them, but the one thing I'll say is that if you put yourself in their mindset, they believed that this stuff was, incredibly important. It was your immortal soul, that you needed to believe as they believed. Otherwise, you were in mortal danger, and you were putting everyone else in danger. Because if you convinced someone of your wrong thing, you guys would all, have a very unpleasant afterlife. So they thought it was very, very, very important to find anyone who believed the wrong stuff and, get rid of them, or, and just and stamp out those bad ideas. At the time, there wasn't the same idea, that we have in the United States of America, that, hey, you believe what you want, we all believe different things. There, they thought what you believed was very important, and you had to believe the right thing, or we need to take care of you in a bad way. Last but not least, I just want to make sure that you know that in terms of popular religion, I'm talking about here like the way that sort of regular people would experience their religion at this time. That Christian saints were very important to ordinary people. They would often, like pray to saints, not just to to God or anything like that, but they would pray to saints to help them out, and then whatever you would pray to particular saints for particular things. And also relics were very important to these people. Relics would be objects connected to a saint in some way. Some churches would claim to have like the bones of various saints, or like a cup that was associated with a saint. And those relics were also important in medieval religious life. The objects were thought to be able to, like, some objects could like heal you. Some objects could produce miracles. So relics and saints were like loomed very large in popular religion in medieval times.